In a quiet room washed in the glow of amber light, time itself seems to slow. The edges of the furniture fade into the shadows, and on the desk before us lies a stack of weathered case files. Their covers are worn smooth from decades of handling, the ink on their labels softened by age. These are the records of Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, each page a doorway into a world where medicine and spirit intertwine. Among them rests a particular file, its paper tinged with the faint scent of castor oil and pressed herbs, marked simply liver and blood purification. Cayce often spoke of the liver with a kind of reverence. To him, it was not merely an organ hidden beneath the rib cage, it was the guardian of the blood, the silent gatekeeper filtering every drop before it could nourish the rest of the body. The liver, he once said, is like the sentinel at the city's main gate. If the guard is strong, the city thrives. If the guard falters, invaders pour in. Those invaders were the toxins and waste products our bodies constantly generate. When the liver was clear, the bloodstream became like a fresh mountain spring, carrying vitality to every cell. But when the liver was congested or sluggish, it became a dammed river, its waters clouded and heavy. You might be watching this now from your living room, your office, or perhaps on a quiet evening walk. Wherever you are, take a moment and notice the miracle happening inside you. Every minute, over a quart of blood flows through your liver, being sifted and renewed. And yet for many of us, this work goes unnoticed until the system falters. Cayce's insights invite us to pay attention before trouble begins. The Cayce histories show a striking pattern. People came to him with ailments as diverse as chronic fatigue, skin eruptions, digestive troubles, and even clouded thinking. In session after session, Cayce traced these issues back to one central cause: the liver's inability to keep the bloodstream pure. It was a simple idea, but profound, like discovering that all the flickering lights in a city were tied to a single, faulty power station. If you repaired the source, the whole system lit up again. This is where the story becomes not just medical, but deeply human. Imagine a middle-aged farmer, stooped with exhaustion, his skin sallow, eyes dulled. He tells Cayce of his constant headaches, his inability to work the fields as he once did. In trance, Cayce describes how toxins have built up in the man's bloodstream due to a congested liver. The recommendation: a sequence of simple, natural steps to restore the liver's rhythm and flow. Within months, the man returns with color in his cheeks, his energy renewed, speaking of how everything seems lighter now, as if my body had let out a long-held breath. Cayce's metaphor for the liver as a guardian of the blood is more than poetic. Modern science now affirms what he knew intuitively. The liver filters harmful substances, processes nutrients, and keeps the balance of chemicals that allow the body to thrive. Without its tireless work, the body's internal environment turns hostile. But the beauty of Cayce's approach was that it didn't require harsh purges or dangerous extremes. His methods were gentle, working with the body rather than against it, supporting the liver so it could resume its natural duties. He saw the liver's health as a reflection of the whole person's life. Diet, habits, stress, emotional state, all played a part. This understanding led him to craft remedies that combined physical treatments with lifestyle shifts. It wasn't enough to clean the filter. One had to keep it from being overwhelmed again. So in this journey we begin today, we'll trace the arc of Cayce's wisdom, understanding the liver's central role, recognizing the signs of its distress, and applying time-tested remedies to restore its power. we'll see that the guardian of the blood is not an abstract concept. It's a living ally inside you, one that responds when you offer it care. And perhaps by the end, you will find yourself more aware of that steady rhythm within, the quiet strength of an organ that never sleeps, holding watch over your life's most precious river. In the next part, we will step deeper into the shadows to see what happens when this guardian falters, and the bloodstream begins to carry more than it should. That's when Cayce's warnings become urgent, and his solutions essential. When the guardian at the city gates grows weary, the cracks begin to appear. Not immediately, but gradually, almost imperceptibly. Cayce described it as a slow dimming of the body's vitality. At first, you might simply feel off, a heaviness in the mornings, a vague fog in your thoughts, a tendency for your skin to lose its glow. But over time, as the liver's capacity falters, the effects spread like ripples through a pond, touching every corner of your internal landscape. In Cayce's records, this phase was often the turning point, the moment when the body's resilience was being tested, and without intervention, deeper illness would take root. The liver, he explained, is not just a filter. It is a chemical workshop, transforming nutrients into usable energy, breaking down hormones, neutralizing toxins. If this workshop slows, those toxins don't simply disappear. They remain in circulation, reabsorbed into tissues, quietly interfering with the body's delicate balance. Cayce's readings are filled with vivid accounts of what happens when the filter fails. A woman in her 30s came seeking help for persistent rashes that no cream could soothe. Cayce's trance reading revealed that the skin irritation was not a surface problem at all, but the result of waste products circulating in her bloodstream because her liver and elimination systems were under strain. He saw the skin as the body's second liver, stepping in to help expel toxins when the primary organ could not keep pace. The result was inflammation, redness, and itching, signals, he said, that the body was calling for relief from within. There was also the case of a teacher plagued by constant fatigue and a deep ache in her joints. Conventional treatment had focused on her muscles and bones, but Cayce traced the issue to the sluggish movement of her blood, thickened by metabolic waste. Without a clean and efficient liver, he explained, even oxygen delivery to the tissues was compromised, leaving her cells starved and inflamed. The answer, as he saw it, was not to chase each symptom, but to restore the blood's purity at its source. He warned, too, of more subtle signs, a persistent bitter taste in the mouth, sensitivity to certain foods, a dull pain or fullness under the right rib cage. These were whispers of the liver's distress, not to be dismissed. Modern medicine now recognizes many of these indicators, but in Cayce's time, such connections were often overlooked. One striking aspect of Cayce's teachings was his belief that emotional and mental states could directly affect the liver's performance. He observed that resentment, frustration, and suppressed anger seemed to congest the body just as surely as a poor diet. The liver, he suggested, was particularly sensitive to our inner climate. A mind burdened with unresolved tension created a body in which the flow of vital fluids was similarly burdened. And then there was the matter of the bloodstream itself. Cayce described it as a river that should run clear and free. When the liver could not adequately filter it, the river grew murky. This murkiness, an invisible cloud of metabolic debris, was a breeding ground for fatigue, infections, and chronic ailments. In his sessions, he would remind patients that the quality of the blood determined how every organ received nourishment. Impure blood was like sending tainted water through the city's plumbing. Eventually, every household suffered. It is easy to imagine, listening to these stories, how a sluggish liver might quietly shape the course of someone's health for years without ever being named as the culprit. This was why Cayce placed such emphasis on awareness and prevention. Waiting until the symptoms became severe meant that the damage had already deepened. So what happens next? When the guardian is failing and the river is clouded? In Cayce's approach, this is the moment to act, not with force, but with steady, intentional support. The body, he believed, always leaned toward healing if given the right conditions. As we move forward, we will step into one of his most famous and gentle tools for waking the liver from its slumber, a method so simple it could be practiced at home, yet so potent that it appears in case after case in his archives. In the next section, you'll discover how a humble oil applied in a particular way became a cornerstone of Cayce's liver restoration plan. From the moment you open the file marked Castor Oil Packs, the faint scent of earth and plant life seems to rise from the page, as if the oil itself has soaked into the history. To most, castor oil was an old-fashioned remedy, something tucked away in the back of a grandmother's cupboard. But to Edgar Cayce, it was a living ally, a gentle activator that could awaken the liver from its sluggish state without shock or strain. He never spoke of it as a miracle cure in itself. Instead, he described it as a way to remind the body of what it already knows. The castor bean plant, with its dense, glossy leaves and seeds rich in thick, golden oil, had been known for centuries in folk medicine. Cayce's contribution was not in discovering the oil, but in revealing a precise, ritual-like application that engaged both the body's physical mechanisms and its subtle energy fields. The process, as outlined in countless readings, was disarmingly simple. A piece of soft flannel saturated in warm castor oil, placed over the right side of the abdomen, the home of the liver, then covered with plastic or wax paper to prevent mess, and topped with a heating pad to encourage absorption. Patients were instructed to lie quietly for an hour or more, letting the warmth and oil penetrate deep into the tissues. On the surface, this might seem like little more than a comfort measure, but Cayce's explanation reached deeper. He believed the oil acted as a molecular key, unlocking congested pathways within the liver and gallbladder. The gentle heat, he said, dilated blood vessels and lymphatic channels, allowing the oil's compounds to travel inward, loosening and dissolving accumulations that hindered the organ's flow. In modern terms, we might speak of increased circulation, improved lymphatic drainage, and the stimulation of bile production. Cayce simply called it removing the debris from the river's gate. His case notes are peppered with stories of transformation. There was the shopkeeper who had endured years of digestive discomfort and pale, tired skin. After weeks of using castor oil packs 3 evenings a week, along with simple dietary adjustments, she reported a warmth in her midsection, a return of appetite, and an almost startling clarity in her complexion. Cayce attributed these changes to the liver resuming its natural pace of filtering and renewal. For others, the benefits appeared not just in physical relief, but in emotional ease. Cayce observed that during the quiet hour of the pack application, the body slipped into a state of rest and digest, activating the parasympathetic nervous system. This shift, he suggested, was just as important as the oil itself, allowing the liver to work without the constant interference of stress hormones. He was careful to pair the packs with guidance on rhythm and patience. Do not expect the tree to bear fruit the day you water it, one transcript records him saying. The packs were to be used consistently, often in cycles of 3 days on, 4 days off, to give the body time to integrate the changes. This alternation mirrored the natural ebb and flow of the body's healing responses. Modern readers might wonder if such a humble method could truly influence a major organ. Yet time and again, Cayce's follow-up readings confirmed shifts not only in symptoms, but in the body's overall tone and vitality. To him, this was the genius of natural healing. You do not force the river. You clear the stones from its path and let it find its course again. For those who practiced his recommendations faithfully, the packs became more than a therapy. They were a quiet ritual, a space carved out in the day for renewal. The warmth of the oil, the stillness of the hour, the intention behind the act, these were threads woven together into a fabric of healing. But Cayce never stopped at a single remedy. He knew that the liver's revival required both direct activation and the right nourishment. A filter can be cleaned, but it must also be fed with clean water if it is to remain clear. In the next part, we will walk into the green heart of his plan, exploring how the simplest foods from the earth can sweep the bloodstream and restore the liver's strength from the inside out. The transition from oil and warmth to the cool, living vibrancy of green foods feels like stepping from a sunlit parlor into a garden after rain. Cayce often guided his patients from the restorative passivity of castor oil packs into the active cleansing of diet, with green plants at the center of his vision. He saw them not merely as food, but as carriers of the earth's most direct medicine, minerals, chlorophyll, and living vitality. In his readings, Cayce referred to leafy greens as nature's brushes, sweeping through the body to remove the fine dust of metabolic waste that the liver had loosened. These foods, he explained, had a dual effect. They provided the building blocks the liver needed for its work, and they also helped neutralize the acidic byproducts that strained the blood's delicate balance. This concept aligns with what we now know as the acid-alkaline balance, though Cayce described it in simple, almost tactile terms. Greens lighten the current of the blood, he would say, as fresh air clears a room. The emphasis was always on freshness and variety. Romaine, spinach, kale, and watercress appeared frequently in his recommendations, often alongside parsley for its potent cleansing effect. Cayce encouraged eating them raw when possible to preserve the enzymes and vitality that heat could diminish. When cooked, they were to be lightly steamed, never boiled into lifelessness, so their essence remained intact. One reading tells of a seamstress in her 40s who had battled persistent swelling in her hands and feet. Her work required long hours of sitting, and her diet leaned heavily toward bread and meat. Cayce prescribed a shift: daily salads of mixed greens with olive oil and lemon, reducing heavy proteins to a few times a week, and incorporating lightly cooked greens at her evening meal. Within weeks, she reported not only a reduction in swelling, but a clarity of mind she had not felt in years. "I feel cleaner inside," she told her family, an expression that perfectly captured Cayce's view of dietary cleansing. He also linked the green foods to the blood in a symbolic way. Just as chlorophyll gives plants their deep emerald hue, hemoglobin gives our blood its rich red, both molecules similar in structure, differing mainly in their central atom: magnesium for chlorophyll, iron for hemoglobin. This kinship, Cayce suggested, allowed greens to refresh the life stream directly, fortifying the blood and easing the liver's burden. The inclusion of green foods was not about deprivation. It was about crowding out the excesses that clogged the liver's work. Cayce advised that these should form the majority of the plate, with other foods acting as complements rather than the main act. This shift alone, he believed, could change the entire tone of a person's health over time. And then there was the matter of mineral content. Many greens, he noted, were rich in magnesium, potassium, and calcium, elements the liver needed to keep bile fluid and the blood from thickening. By restoring these minerals, the body's internal rivers flowed more freely, carrying away the remnants of waste the liver had processed. Cayce's approach to greens also carried a subtle discipline. The daily act of preparing and consuming fresh plant foods was itself a gesture of care and attention toward the body. In his philosophy, healing was rarely a single, dramatic intervention. It was the sum of such small, consistent acts. The Cayce notes show how, even in severe conditions, the introduction of greens made a marked difference. For a man in his 50s suffering from chronic skin eruptions, the change began not with complex treatments, but with a shift toward meals rich in greens, fresh fruits, and pure water. Over months, his skin cleared, his digestion improved, and his energy returned, not overnight, but steadily, like a fog lifting. Still, Cayce knew that greens were only part of the equation. Once the liver was gently awakened and supported, it needed targeted nourishment to rebuild its cells and enhance its filtering power. This was where certain roots and juices, particularly carrot and beet, came into play. In the next section, we'll follow Cayce's path into these vibrant elixirs and see how they became the tonics of renewal in his liver and blood-cleansing plan. If the leafy greens were Cayce's brushes, sweeping gently through the body's inner corridors, then carrot and beet juices were his bright, potent paints, pouring life back into the canvas of the liver. In his readings, these two humble roots were often singled out as the elixirs of renewal, capable of not only cleansing but also rebuilding the organ's capacity to filter and refresh the bloodstream. Cayce described carrots as sunlight stored in root form, their rich orange hue a sign of the beta-carotene within, a nutrient the body converts to vitamin A, essential for tissue repair. To him, carrots were especially adept at clearing mucus and stagnant matter from the liver and bile ducts. The juice, extracted fresh, was like a concentrated infusion of this vitality, easily absorbed and quickly put to work. He would often recommend a glass daily, taken alone or blended with other vegetables to adjust taste and balance. Beets, in contrast, were the deep miners. Their crimson pigment hinted at their role in building strong, healthy blood, and Cayce saw them as a direct tonic for the liver's cells. Modern understanding aligns with this, recognizing compounds in beets that support bile production and help neutralize toxins. In his guidance, beet juice was to be taken in small quantities, often mixed with carrot juice, because of its strong stimulating effect. Too much at once, he cautioned, could stir up more waste than the body was ready to handle. One remarkable case in his files tells of a bookbinder whose work kept him hunched over tables, inhaling the fumes of glues and dyes. Over the years, he developed chronic digestive troubles, headaches, and a jaundiced tint to his skin. Cayce prescribed a program of castor oil packs, daily greens, and a morning glass of carrot juice with a splash of beet juice. Within a season, the man's skin regained its clarity. His headaches vanished, and his digestion became regular. He spoke of feeling washed clean from the inside out. The synergy of carrot and beet was something Cayce valued deeply. Carrots brought a gentle, broad-spectrum cleansing and nourishment, while beets delivered targeted stimulation to the liver's detox pathways. Together, they acted as both broom and builder, sweeping away debris while laying down the materials for renewal. Cayce's instructions were often precise about timing. He recommended drinking these juices fresh, ideally within minutes of preparation, to preserve their life force. Morning was favored for their energizing qualities, but some individuals found benefit from an afternoon serving, especially if fatigue set in before evening. The key was consistency, allowing the nutrients to steadily rebuild the liver's reserves. In his philosophy, These juices were not isolated superfoods to be taken in bursts, but part of a larger pattern of care. The body's healing unfolded in layers, and the daily act of preparing and drinking these elixirs was both a physical and symbolic commitment to cleansing. Another point Cayce emphasized was the role of balance. He often paired carrot and beet juice with other supportive vegetables, celery for its mineral salts, cucumber for its cooling hydration, and leafy greens for chlorophyll. This not only rounded out the nutrient profile, but prevented the intense flavors of beet from overwhelming the palate or the system. Through his readings, a clear picture emerges. When the liver is given both the gentle activation of castor oil and the steady nourishment of plant-based cleansing, the blood begins to shift. The river runs clearer, oxygen moves more freely, and the organs downstream, heart, kidneys, skin, begin to reflect this improved quality. But Cayce knew that even with activation and nourishment, the process could stall if other pathways of elimination were blocked. This was where herbal allies stepped in, plants with specific powers to encourage bile flow and escort toxins out of the body entirely. In the next section, we will walk into the world of roots and bitters, meeting the botanical companions Cayce called upon to keep the liver's channels open and the blood's current strong. In the quiet wisdom of Cayce's readings, there is a recurring theme. The body works as a network of channels, and when one is congested, the others strain to compensate. Nowhere was this more evident than in his use of herbs, plants chosen not for their trendiness, but for their deep, time-honored relationship with the liver and bloodstream. He often spoke of these plants as allies, companions from the earth whose chemistry could stir sluggish bile, dissolve waste, and steady the pulse of the body's internal rivers. Two of these stood out most prominently in his liver cleansing protocols: dandelion root and wormwood. Dandelion root, humble and often dismissed as a weed, was for Cayce a quiet powerhouse. He described it as a broom for the bile ducts, sweeping away stagnation so that the liver could drain freely into the intestines. Rich in potassium, iron, and bitter compounds, it had the dual effect of stimulating bile production and replenishing minerals lost during detoxification. He often recommended it as a tea or decoction, simmered gently to draw out its earthy strength. Patients were told to sip it slowly, allowing the bitters to touch the tongue, activating a reflex through the digestive tract that told the liver it's time to flow. Wormwood, in contrast, carried a sharper edge. Its intense bitterness, Cayce explained, could rouse the digestive organs from a state of torpor, stimulating not just the liver but also the gallbladder and pancreas. He cautioned, however, that wormwood's potency required respect. It was to be used in small amounts, often blended with gentler herbs to temper its force. The goal was never to shock the liver, but to nudge it firmly back into rhythm. In his archives, there is the story of a young mother who came to Cayce complaining of persistent bloating, fatigue, and a sense of heaviness in her right side. Her diet was already improved, rich in greens and fresh juices, but progress had plateaued. Cayce recommended adding a course of dandelion root tea, taken twice daily, and a short cycle of wormwood under supervision. Within weeks, she reported a return of appetite, a lightness in her step, and most tellingly, a brighter tone to her skin. Cayce also integrated other herbal supports depending on the person's needs. Milk thistle for its gentle cell-protective effects, yellow dock for its mineral richness and blood-toning qualities, and burdock root for its ability to purify through the skin and kidneys. Each was chosen with the same principle in mind: support the liver's ability to process and release toxins, and the blood will follow suit. One of Cayce's lesser-known insights was how the taste of these herbs mattered as much as their chemistry. The bitterness, he said, acted like a signal flare to the body's inner systems, waking dormant reflexes that modern diets, heavy and sweet and salty, had dulled. By reintroducing the bitter taste, you reawaken the body's own cleansing instincts. The herbal phase of his liver and blood program was rarely isolated. Cayce would weave it into the larger rhythm: castor oil packs to soften congestion, greens and juices to nourish and flush, and herbs to open the deeper channels. This layered approach created momentum, each element preparing the way for the next, until the system as a whole began to hum again. Yet Cayce also knew that even the most well-chosen herbs would falter if the body's primary waste exit, the colon, was sluggish. Toxins released from the liver could simply be reabsorbed if they lingered too long in the intestines. And so, in his method, the next step was as essential as the first: ensuring the steady, unobstructed flow of elimination. In the next section, we will explore this gut-liver connection and why Cayce considered regular bowel movements as vital to clean blood as the liver's own filtering work. In Cayce's view, the liver and the colon were like two locks on a canal. Both had to open in sequence for the river of waste to flow freely. You could clear the liver with oils, nourish it with greens and juices, even stimulate it with herbs. But if the colon, its downstream partner, remained sluggish, toxins would simply circle back into the bloodstream, undoing much of the progress. He saw this not as an abstract risk, but as a common and very real obstacle to healing. His descriptions of this backflow were vivid. When the colon held onto waste too long, he explained, the stagnant material fermented, producing byproducts that were easily reabsorbed through the intestinal wall. This was like a city flushing its waste into the river, only for the same water to be piped back into its own homes. The results could range from subtle, sluggishness, cloudy thinking, to severe, such as skin eruptions, joint pain, and recurrent illness. To prevent this, Cayce made regular bowel movements a central pillar of any liver and blood purification program. He emphasized that elimination should be daily, preferably at the same time each day, to reinforce the body's natural rhythm. This was not merely about frequency, but also about quality. The elimination needed to be complete, without strain, and without lingering sense of fullness or discomfort. The methods he recommended varied depending on the individual. For some, increasing dietary fiber through leafy greens, raw vegetables, and whole grains was enough to restore the rhythm. For others, gentle natural aids like psyllium husk or ground flaxseed were used to soften and bulk the stool. Cayce sometimes suggested small amounts of olive oil in the morning to lubricate the intestines and stimulate movement, a practice that also provided the liver with a steady source of healthy fat. Hydration was equally important. Cayce repeatedly reminded his patients that water was the river's carrier. Without enough of it, the body would dam itself, making every detox effort more difficult. He encouraged drinking pure water between meals, allowing it to flush the system without diluting digestive juices. In his case notes, there is a memorable account of a retired railroad worker who had followed Cayce's liver protocol faithfully: castor oil packs, greens, juices, and herbs, yet saw only partial improvement. When Cayce reviewed his situation in trance, the cause became clear. Irregular elimination was allowing toxins to linger. With adjustments to diet, added flaxseed, and a daily routine of warm water upon rising, the man's progress accelerated. Within weeks, he felt lighter, his skin cleared, and his energy became steady throughout the day. Cayce also understood the link between the nervous system and bowel function. Emotional tension, he observed, could slow intestinal movement just as surely as a poor diet. He would sometimes recommend abdominal massage or gentle exercise, walking, stretching, or light calisthenics, to remind the bowels of their role. This physical activation, combined with relaxation techniques like deep breathing, often restored a natural urge where it had been absent. The gut-liver connection in Cayce's philosophy was more than mechanical. It was deeply cooperative. The liver filtered the blood, sending waste into bile. The colon received and expelled it. If either failed, the whole system suffered. Maintaining both meant that the bloodstream could truly be cleansed, free from the recirculation of old toxins. Once the pathways were clear from liver to colon, Cayce believed the stage was set for something profound. The body could begin to heal itself, not in spurts, but in a steady rhythm. The next step in his teaching was to honor this rhythm, to move with it rather than force against it. In the next section, we will explore how Cayce wove timing, pacing, and gentle persistence into his healing approach, what he called the rhythm of healing. Cayce often spoke of healing as a dance, not a race. Once the liver was awakened, the bloodstream cleared and the channels of elimination opened. His focus shifted to what he called the rhythm of healing. This rhythm was not measured in days or weeks, but in cycles. Periods of gentle effort followed by rest, like the ebb and flow of tides. He believed that the body responded best to consistency, but also to pauses that allowed its systems to integrate and rebuild. In his view, the worst mistake a person could make during detoxification was to push too hard, too fast. He compared it to stirring up silt from the bottom of a clear pond. Too much disturbance at once could cloud the water more than before. Cayce encouraged his patients to think of cleansing as a gradual clearing of the river, letting each improvement settle before moving to the next stage. One of the clearest illustrations of this principle came from a patient who had begun the full program: castor oil packs, green-rich diet, juices, herbs, and colon care, and reported dramatic improvements in energy and digestion. Excited by the results, she doubled the frequency of her packs and juices, hoping to accelerate her healing. Within a week, she experienced headaches, irritability, and skin breakouts. When Cayce reviewed her case in trance, his counsel was gentle but firm. The body has been awakened. Now let it find its stride. Healing is not a chase, it is a return to harmony. This stride was often marked by repeating cycles. 3 days of focused treatment followed by 4 days of lighter maintenance, or weeks of active cleansing alternating with weeks of restorative eating. Cayce believed these rhythms mirrored nature's own balance: day and night, work and rest, planting and harvest. By aligning with them, the body's innate intelligence could unfold its healing without resistance. He also advised paying attention to signs from the body itself. A sudden burst of energy after days of fatigue, clearer skin after a brief flare-up, improved sleep. These were not random, but part of the body's recalibration. In such moments, Cayce urged his patients to acknowledge the shift, to cooperate with the body's work by supporting it with rest, clean foods, and steady hydration. Breathing was another component of rhythm in Cayce's practice. Deep, conscious breaths, taken several times throughout the day, not only oxygenated the blood, but also helped maintain calm in the nervous system. He saw stress as one of the great disruptors of healing rhythm, capable of tightening the gut, slowing detox, and taxing the liver's capacity. By cultivating calm, you kept the inner rivers flowing without turbulence. This measured pace also helped prevent what modern practitioners call detox crises, when the release of too many toxins at once overwhelms the body's elimination systems. Cayce's approach minimized such reactions by spacing treatments, layering supports, and always giving the body time to process changes. To him, this was not just a matter of safety, it was a matter of respect. The liver, the blood, the gut, and the nerves were partners in a delicate choreography. You could not yank one ahead without throwing the others off step. Healing was a symphony, and each part had to come in at the right time. With a steady rhythm established, patients often found that their bodies began to ask for healthy routines on their own, craving greens, preferring water over sugary drinks, seeking rest instead of pushing through exhaustion. Cayce considered this the surest sign that the healing had moved from an external program into an internal habit. And once this rhythm was set, something else became possible. Recovery stories that seemed, even to the skeptical, remarkable. In the next section, we will step into those stories, real lives transformed when the liver and blood found their harmony again. The stories in Cayce's archives are more than clinical notes. They are living portraits of people whose lives were reclaimed when the river of their blood ran clear again. They speak not only of restored health, but of restored purpose, joy, and connection. The intangible things that illness quietly steals away. One such story tells of a middle-aged carpenter named Thomas. For years, he had battled persistent fatigue, skin blotches, and digestive upset. Doctors had treated each symptom in isolation, yet nothing held. When he came to Cayce, his voice carried the weary tone of a man who had learned to live in half-light. In trance, Cayce described a congested liver struggling to keep pace, its sluggish flow clouding the bloodstream. The recommendation was straightforward. Castor oil packs 3 nights a week, a diet abundant in greens and fresh juices, dandelion root tea twice daily, and attention to regular elimination. The transformation was slow but steady. Weeks in, Thomas noticed his mornings felt lighter. The skin on his face began to clear. By the 3rd month, he reported working full days in his workshop without the afternoon crashes that had plagued him for years. "It feels," he wrote in a follow-up letter, "as if someone has cleaned the windows I've been looking through." There was also the case of Eleanor, a retired schoolteacher who had developed joint pain so severe she could no longer tend her beloved garden. Cayce traced her discomfort to an accumulation of acidic wastes in her blood, linked to a liver burdened by years of processed foods and emotional strain. Her plan mirrored the core protocol, but added beet juice for its blood-building qualities and gentle abdominal massage to aid bowel function. 6 months later, Eleanor was not only moving freely, but tending her garden daily, her hands deep in the soil she loved. "I thought I was just getting old," she told her friends, "but it turns out I was just getting dirty inside." One of the most striking recoveries involved a young artist named Samuel. He suffered from eczema so intense that his hands cracked and bled, making painting nearly impossible. Doctors prescribed creams and antihistamines, but Cayce saw the skin as a mirror of the blood. By cleansing the liver and improving elimination, he explained, the skin would no longer need to act as a secondary channel for toxin release. Samuel followed the regimen with dedication, even adopting daily breathing exercises to calm his nervous system. Gradually, the flare-ups diminished, the cracks healed, and color returned to his skin. Months later, he held his first gallery showing in years, his canvases filled with vivid, unbroken lines. These were not isolated wonders. Cayce's files hold page after page of similar accounts, cases where chronic ailments shifted, not by chasing symptoms, but by restoring the body's central purification system. The common thread was always the same: awaken the liver, cleanse the blood, maintain the channels of elimination, and align with the rhythm of healing. To Cayce, these outcomes reinforced a truth he repeated often. When you clear the stream, life returns to the fields. In other words, the health of the blood touched everything: the clarity of thought, the brightness of the eyes, the resilience of the body, and the steadiness of the spirit. With such recoveries documented, the final step in Cayce's approach was to ensure these gains lasted, not for weeks or months, but for years. It was not enough to clean the river. One had to live in a way that kept it from clouding again. In the next section, we will gather the threads of this journey into a way of life, one that allows the guardian of your blood to serve you well for decades to come. When the river has been cleared and the guardian restored to strength, Cayce's focus turns to the long horizon. For him, the true measure of healing was not how quickly symptoms disappeared, but how steadily health could be maintained through the seasons of life. The aim was to live in a way that kept the liver resilient, the blood pure, and the body's internal channels open, not as a temporary program, but as a natural rhythm woven into daily living. He often spoke of the liver as an inner riverbank, shaped not only by what flows through it, but by the habits that either erode or strengthen its edges. To keep this riverbank strong, Cayce advised carrying forward the core principles of the cleansing plan, adapted for maintenance rather than active detox. The first pillar was dietary balance. Greens, fresh vegetables, and mineral-rich foods were to remain the foundation, with moderate amounts of clean protein, fish, poultry, or legumes, and healthy fats from sources like olive oil and nuts. Sugars, refined flours, and heavily processed foods, he warned, could quietly burden the liver, setting the stage for stagnation again. Even celebratory meals, he suggested, should be balanced by lighter, cleansing foods in the days following, much like a river refreshed by a clear water tributary after a storm. The second pillar was regular movement, not grueling exercise, but consistent activity. Walking, stretching, gardening, anything that kept circulation steady and the muscles engaged. Cayce noted that movement aided not only blood flow, but also the rhythm of elimination, preventing the slow creep of waste back into the system. Hydration remained a third constant. Water, he said, is the river's ally. A steady intake of pure water spread throughout the day helped keep bile fluid, blood viscosity optimal, and every tissue refreshed. Maintenance also meant seasonal attention. Cayce often recommended a gentle reset 2 to 4 times a year, short cycles of castor oil packs, increased greens and juices, and perhaps a week of herbal teas to give the liver a chance to clear any backlog before it became a problem. This was preventive care in its truest form, addressing small imbalances before they had a chance to deepen. The emotional and mental climate remained as important in maintenance as it was during recovery. Cayce reminded patients that the liver was sensitive to inner states. Prolonged frustration, resentment, or mental strain could constrict its function just as surely as a poor diet. Practices like meditation, prayer, quiet walks, or creative work were not indulgences in his view. They were vital supports for the body's chemistry. His case notes show that those who adopted these maintenance habits often enjoyed more than just the absence of illness. They spoke of clearer thinking, steadier moods, greater stamina, and a renewed capacity for joy in ordinary days. Their lives took on a quality of lightness, not from avoiding life's challenges, but from carrying them in a body that felt clean and capable. And so the journey comes full circle. From the first recognition of a weary guardian, through the patient work of cleansing and restoring, to the quiet confidence of a life lived in cooperation with the body's own wisdom. In Cayce's words, health is not given. It is earned in the daily companionship with your own body. To live with a clean inner river is to live in that companionship, listening, supporting, and respecting the system that sustains you from within. Cayce believed that healing was never just about removing disease. It was about creating the conditions in which health could flourish naturally. In the story of liver and blood purification, this meant more than purging toxins. It meant restoring harmony to the body's central currents, allowing every organ, tissue, and cell to receive the nourishment it was designed to have. The liver, as he saw it, was a mirror of how we lived. Feed it well, let it flow freely, guard it from excess, and it would serve you tirelessly. Neglect it, burden it, or ignore its signals, and its quiet struggle would one day become a louder plea. Yet even then, Cayce's message was one of hope. The body leans toward healing, and with patience and cooperation, it will find its way back. What makes his approach endure is its simplicity. There were no exotic imports or costly treatments, only castor oil from the plant, greens from the garden, juices from familiar roots, herbs that grew in the fields, water from the well, and the steady rhythm of care. These were accessible to nearly anyone in any time, and their power lay in their consistent application. There is something deeply reassuring in knowing that such ordinary things can yield extraordinary results. It reminds us that the body's wisdom is ancient, rooted in the same earth that produces the plants we eat and the water we drink. We are not separate from these things. They are part of the same system that flows through our veins. And perhaps that is the true heart of Cayce's teaching, that healing is less about conquering illness and more about returning to relationship with the body, with the earth, and with the rhythms that sustain both. In caring for the liver and purifying the blood, we are not just maintaining an organ. We are tending the very river of life within us. So, as you set down this journey and step back into your own daily rhythms, remember the quiet guardian at your side. Notice what you feed it, how you move it, the climate you create within it. Give it the tools it needs: a plate of greens, a glass of fresh juice, a walk under the open sky, a moment of stillness, and trust that it will answer in kind. Because when the river runs clear, everything it touches can grow again. And in that clarity, health is not a goal you chase, but a companion that walks with you day after day for the rest of your life.